6 p.m. and welcome to Council Chambers on this November 6th, third night of our corporate planning meetings. If you recall from Monday, we had presentations from administration where we outlined the corporate plan was presented to Council. And yesterday we had quite a good debates and conversations regarding the budget amongst Council, and we took the opportunity to make some motions to adjust the budget and the corporate plan as we see fit. Some motions passed, some motions did not, but it was good to see the conversation and the ability of Council to discuss and debate those things openly and freely. So members of Council continue with our business plan, with the corporate plan. Any questions and comments arising from the business plan presentations, the handout that was handed out, and conversations amongst Council over the last 2 nights? Okay. Anyone has any motions, comments? Councilor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Page 53 in our printed package. Relatively simple motion this evening. As we reviewed our package, there's some information around the storm management rates, but we've been advised that we won't see much in respect to this until we actually have the utility bylaw in place, which we aren't expected to see till November 25th. So with that, I'd like to make a motion that administration include the following information in the presentation of the stormwater utility bylaw for the November 25th council meeting. 1, a description of how many units exist for each occupancy classification proposed on page 53. 2, the total projected revenue based on the calculation of the above and the proposed rate. She has it. 3, an alternate rate proposal that would not include the debenture repayment as presented to Council during the October 16th, 2019 Council meeting and the total projected revenue based on this rate. And 4, a summary of other municipalities' current or proposed storm rates and their model of calculation. Okay. And I sent this to the recording secretary, so it should be up on the screen momentarily, and I can speak to it briefly.
Yes, just let me till it's on the screen. Okay. Okay, that's fully captured, so go ahead and make your opening comments.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you, Council. I'm very supportive of the storm utility rate and very happy to see cost allocations aligning correctly for the purpose in which they are used. I find that there are still many uncertainties and items requiring clarity before Council can provide an informed decision to administration regarding the proposed utility rate. I believe that this information will greatly assist Council in selecting the appropriate rate and calculation model to fit our municipality. And if Council sees fit to add any additional information to this, I would be open to a friendly amendment.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Councilor Laurie. Members of Council, questions and comments to the mover or to administration?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, so members of Council, basically the motion from Councilor Laurie, it does not affect the corporate plan. It does affect, it asks for more information to be brought back on November 25th is when we're looking at the storm management utility rate. So there's nothing that would affect the corporate plan at this point in time. Councilor Bennett, you had your hand up.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to clarify with administration that those are all things that can be attained and presented to us by that time. No adjustment needs to be made with the dates or anything like that. It's achievable for our administration.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Bennett, it is all achievable. It's we've been working on it and it'll be ready for November 25th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Matties?
Your Worship, I just have a question of clarification. So basically, in terms of the storm water rate and the revenue that is generated from that, what is the specific, is it to pay the interest on debt that we would utilize as a result of the initiatives that we have or proposed to understand in 6 months from now? And my question then is, how can we determine a rate without knowing what exactly it is that we need?
Your worship, through to Councillor Matty. So the storm rate does look at all costs related to storms. So this would include operating costs for staff, as well as maintenance costs to make sure the storm system is clean, as well as we had built in a projected amount where we're anticipating that there's going to be some debenture borrowing required in the in 2020, the upcoming year. Because we don't know that amount, and that report will come to council early in Q1 of 2020. That amount would go directly to reserve, and then once we figure out the project and the financing required, the dollars would be sitting there to be able to fund the debenture. And I don't know if General Manager of Planning wants to add anything about the costs that are in there, if I covered that adequately.
Your worship, just to supplement, I believe it was Q2 that we were going to commit to the report, so I'll just make that one small correction. And there were two projects that council's aware of, and they're both of fairly significant dollars. So again, once we have those reports ready, we would be able to make further recommendations, and then the reserves that are in the rate here would then be used to fund those future requirements.
Thank you.
I just have one follow-up.
Go ahead.
And my follow-up question is with regards to the date then, that once this is determined the amount, when would that, what date would it be implemented next in 2020?
Your worship, through to Councillor Matthews, just to clarify the implementation of the rate.
Of the whatever amount that is selected per household.
The proposal is January 1st currently. That could be adjusted by council, but it is sitting as a January 1st implementation currently.
Okay, and that would require a motion to change that date, or would that be something that we could discuss at November 25th?
November 25th.
Your worship, through to Councillor Matthews, I would suggest that that's done at the timing of the bylaw on the November 25th meeting, once you sort of see this additional information.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Pletchko, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just wondering if administration can clarify what that current rate actually is in a dollar figure comparative to the dollar figure that we're asking for that has currently been taken out of the current rate to move over to the new stormwater rate. There's a rate that we pay as a rate payer here in town that's been built in before. What has moved over here?
Your worship, through to Councillor Pletchko, so I know the total dollars, are you wanting that as a dollar per resident rate?
Yes, correct.
We will include that in the November 25th report if that's okay.
Okay, so there is an actual rate there today that the residents are picking, and I'll pick a number. It could be from $1 to $11, but there's also an increase in this that will compensate for some of what is projected that we need to look after the storm.
Your worship, through to Councillor Pletchko, that's correct. There's about, I believe it was around 500,000 that was currently being funded through the tax rate and a little bit through the sanitary sewer, as well as water and waste. There was a small amount as well. The additional costs identified going forward are for some additional maintenance costs. Just with the storm events over the past year, there's some additional costs there identified, as well as the requirement for the infrastructure. So it'll go into reserve, but it's essentially earmarked to pay for those debentures into the future.
Just a follow-up to that.
Sure. So the average is based on our storm management presentation that was adopted by council. Currently, the town of Stony collects roughly $500,000 for storm. And then I think the administration was asking for just a little bit over $1 million. So if you do the math at $11, currently is $5.50 per resident. That's getting collected right now for storm. I think administration is asking for another 5.5, so to make it 11. Is that what you're asking for? Because on the,
Okay, so, so I'll be specific. I actually got numbers from Jen. I can't find my email that I got from you, and I think it related to, you broke it down to 3 categories that we got money from. It equated to, I think, $5.87 or something, I think is what that magic number was. What I'm looking for is what that number was that you sent me, comparative to the $11. Now, I'm also, I think the other thing that I'll be looking for is, we don't know what that cost is. And we know that in the past, there hasn't been enough allocated to this to look after what it is. And I'm hoping what we will see at that point in time as well is that this is not something that we put all the burden on our taxpayer today. This has to be spread out from past, today, and future. So I'm quite concerned with the rate that we have picked for just a pie in the sky number, and I get we've got a bit of math and theory that goes with it based on what you think those costs are going to be, a $10 million ask, a debenture that goes with that. I'm hoping when we see that in later on this month, that the 25th, that we actually see those real numbers associated with this, so that when we are asking our residents to support what we're doing, there's better support for it.
Your worship, through to Councillor Polechko, and then I think this is number 3 maybe that Councillor Laurie has requested, that the rate is shown without that debenture included. And I have the debenture amount that we're projecting. It is $286,000 annually.
okay, so Deputy Mayor, are you clear what they're bringing back on the 25th? Any other questions and comments regarding the motion? Okay, see none. I do support the motion. I think we're moving down a proper path and making sure the utilities in our community are well cared for and well maintained. Look forward to seeing the presentation on November 25th. Councillor Laurie, you have a chance to close.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very quickly, further to Councillor Polechko's comment, as was identified in the October 16th presentation, there's $241,149 coming out of the tax base, $170,015 coming out of the sanitary sewer, $69,227 coming out of our drinking water, $19,227 coming out of the waste management. So those, from the discussions we've already had in corporate plan, have been removed from those rates already as the 2020 corporate plan is presented, which is a total of $499,618. New allocations that have been projected are $106,000 for common cost recovery, $170,000 for maintenance cost, and $286,331 for debenture payment, which brings the total of the storm cost projected in this report to $1.062 million. As was noted by the general manager, I have asked between number 2 and number 3 on my motion that we see the breakdown in the revenues of the rate as presented and the breakdown of the revenues without the debenture, because we have the uncertainty around the debenture. I do feel that the maintenance cost and the common cost recovery are important facets that do stay in this plan. One thing of interest to note with number 4, summary of the other municipalities' current or proposed storm rates. I have already done a little bit of research into this, and we will see a wide variety of calculation methods used by different municipalities that should help us make the best decision for our municipality. With that, Your Worship, I have no further comments. I hope Council supports this motion, and I look forward to discussing this further on the 25th.
Okay. Thank you. With that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Nothing. So that's carried. Okay, thank you, Councillor Laurie. Any other questions, comments, or motions from Council? Okay, Councillor Mattis, go ahead.
Your Worship, yesterday we talked about the Public Works building, and I would like to place a motion for adding from our tax base to the reserve, to a reserve for the Public Works building of 0.5%.
Okay. So I think the math is about $85,000. So So if we can get that on the screen. So the motion by Councillor Matthews is to add $85,000 to the Common Services Reserve, I believe, is where it's going to. And that's a 0.5% increase in taxes.
With a note that it would be for that purpose.
Okay, does that look correct?
Sure, if we don't put the 0.5% tax, we would just put the number in.
Yeah, or at 85,000.
It's $50 short.
Yeah, so it's very, very close to that.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I think 50% is 84,950. So I just rounded up to 85,000. It's probably easier for us to do.
And it's fine, except for that we're doing that every year and the taxes change. Okay, all right, okay.
Okay, so to be clear, that is a yearly.
Yes, per year.
Just for clarification, Your Worship, so the mover would want that to occur in 2020, 2021, 2022?
It is
so on and so forth.
Council Matty wants a yearly increase. Okay, it's on, so go ahead, Councillor Mattis, with your opening statement.
Okay, we had talked about last night about bringing the Public Works building back into the current planning within to 2021, and that was not accepted, and so it's back to the building looking at being constructed, or the facility being constructed in 2024. With that, when a next council gets to that, they're again going to look at a large number, and there'll be other priorities as well. And there's a risk, if there isn't funding in there that would cover, say, for example, the interest on a debenture, that again, it may be a bit too much of a hurdle. By placing some funding in there, that just ensures that we do have funds available, that we could manage the future debt on a public works building.
Okay, thank you for your opening comments, Councillor Mattis. Members of Council, any questions, comments to the mover? Go ahead, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on our chart, that's page 72 of our package, that's where the life cycle for common services is. And so what this motion is saying is that we're going to add $85,000 annually into that reserve item. Or are we going to have another item added to this chart specifically for the Public Works building? In other words, if it's in the Common Service Reserve, we know that it's for the Public Works building, but if it's not on this chart saying specifically for the Public Works building, could it get lost? So that's my question to administration as to how it will appear in our charts.
Okay, first of all, what is the Common Services Reserve used for, and does the Public Works building fund that?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Bennett, it would be fine to go into common services. I mean, we do keep quite detailed records on administration side, so I think that would be fine, that it goes into that reserve, rather than setting up a new reserve, and then once we build the building, you know, that reserve would no longer exist. So I think that this is fine the way that it's proposed.
Okay, any more questions, comments? Councillor Loy.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, through the council. So, if I read your motion correctly, if we have whatever our tax rate that we determine, we will be adding a 0.5% onto that if we vote for your motion. Is that correct?
That was the request. It's basically replaced at 85,000, which is close to that amount.
Right, so if we're at 5%, we are, and adopt this, we are at 5.5%.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I knew where the money was coming from.
Councilor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship. Councilors, I really appreciate Councilor Matty's bringing this forward to show the importance of this project. But I go back to last year, our corporate plan last year, and we had discussions last year about putting money away in reserves for transit. We've had discussions about putting money away for our recreation center and so on and so forth. And you know, we sit here not knowing what exactly this project will look like. We don't know what a price tag on this project will be. We don't know what the requirements will be. And we don't necessarily have an approved project. We have a place marker and a plan. Well, I think it is noble to put some money aside for this. It's also asking our residents to start paying for something that we don't have, a service that isn't in place yet. When I look at the amount that's asked for, it would take 12 years just to put $1 million into that reserve, which would make a marginal dent if it stays on the budget at $9.6 million. Just to get to 304, or in 4 years' time, which would be our projected right now start or potentially even finish of construction in the current plan, that reserve would only be at $340,000. Though I think the premise behind this motion is good. I truly believe in the Public Works facility, and I truly believe that it is a project we need to prioritize and we need to move forward on. I don't believe that adding a tax increase right now in order to just put some money aside for it is appropriate. What I would much rather see is a consideration if there is any operating surplus realized by the town at the end of a fiscal year as to the allocation of those dollars into reserves and how that those potential operating surplus dollars may potentially be able to be allocated into a reserve that could then go towards this facility.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay. See none. Can administration tell us where we're sitting at the current tax rate increase after the motions from last night?
Your Worship, you can see on screen 5.53 with the proposed motion.
So it was 5.03 after last night, and if this motion is passed, then our tax rate increase will be 5.53. Thank you. And possibility of zooming into that. Okay, thank you. That's a lot better, easiest for us to read. I don't see any more hands up, so Councilor Mattis, before I let you close, I believe that the motion is well intended, and I might be able to support it if we're not already looking at a 5% tax increase. I believe in building reserves when the time is good and not when the economic times are bad. I'm looking at ways to reduce the tax impact on our residents because of the overall economy. And putting money away for a public works building that we have not yet decided if we're pulling the trigger on or not. We're still doing analysis this year and the concept plan coming back. So I just cannot support it at this time. Go ahead, Council Matters. You have the motion to the floor to close.
Your Worship, I do appreciate the comments that were provided by Council this evening on this. There's a couple of things to note. First of all, it has been presented that we have had information and toured the Public Works facility. We understand at this point it's not adequately meeting our needs today. So to say we don't know if we're going to do something would be, to me, unreasonable. Anything that I do in my life personally, I prepare my finances to meet goals in the future. If you read the Spruce Grove corporate plan, they're also describing that how it is important to put funds away to meet specific objectives. And it's with regards to inflation. Inflation has a significant impact and in terms of if you wait to put money aside for future years. So I don't have that document, but if you'd like to read that, it's available to all of us. It is important to understand that. Thirdly, if you speak with Parkland County, with the reserves that they have available, they have now a completely different situation than ours in terms of how their reserves have been funded. Having said that, their reserves are in place to fund specific projects going forward. So this is the time to be placing funds for something that we know we need to do. It's 0.5%, and it makes absolutely good sense. And the question that I have before we complete is, what would be the interest on a debenture of $9.6 million? I'm asking administration.
Your Worship,
An estimate is good.
yeah, I mean, the interest rates currently through our Alberta Capital Financing Authority is around 3%. So that you would pay 3% on the 9.6 million.
Okay, so that's what, 300,000 per year?
We- Your Worship, the total interest on a $9.6 million debenture would be 1.2 million over 10 years.
Okay, so the total interest over 10 years? So, sorry, how much would we pay each year?
$215,000 annually in
So
interest.
having some funds available through a reserve would work towards paying the interest on a debenture.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, opposed? Okay, that is defeated. Okay, members of council, any more questions, comments, motions to adjust and correct the budget? Councillor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. No page to reference, as this was something that we spoke about at a prior council meeting back in September. I will put the motion on the floor that administration prepare a taxation of vacant lands policy to be presented to council for consideration prior to the 2020 spring budget adjustments. It should be up on the screen shortly and I can speak to it.
Okay. So it is the taxation of vacant lands policy prior to the 2020 spring adjustment. So that is in April. Okay, it's up. Go ahead and speak to it.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. In the September 3rd, 2019 Governance Priorities meeting, a discussion was held regarding the possibility of considering a taxation of vacant lands policy, and Council later received information on a current policy that exists in a nearby municipality. A policy such as this can impact the development of vacant lands within the town which have remained undeveloped for a defined period of time. The policy could allow the town of Stony Plain to encourage development on these vacant lands. This subclassification is allowable under Section 297 of the Municipal Government Act, assigning assessment classes to property, and be considered for various zoning types. This policy should include clear definitions of applicable and exempt property types with a consideration of a reasonable time frame before property would be assessed into this classification and an appropriate rate model for the vacant lands classification, along with clear guidelines than what as well as when a property would revert back to an appropriate assessment classification from the subclassification. I would request that administration include information on the number of properties in the municipality that would meet the policy definition when presented to council. Essentially, these policies exist in multiple municipalities throughout the province, throughout the country, and throughout the world, and they are in place for a multitude of reasons. Number one is to obviously aid in taxation revenue on properties that are not being developed, and number two is to encourage properties in incomplete areas and that have been left vacant for a significant period of time. The current policy that I've looked at is sitting at 7 years is the minimum time as to where they then become considered vacant and applicable to this policy. So it allows the town to start encouraging property owners to work with those properties and begin to develop those properties into lands that would hold better assessment for the town or into lands that hold better value for the town.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Laurie. Members of council, any questions or comments? Questions to administration for clarity or questions to the mover? Okay. See none. So, Councilor Laurie, the motion is just to bring back something prior to the 2020 plan so that we can adjust if we see fit.
Yes, and so as I said, Your Worship, I'm looking for the policy to be presented to council for consideration prior to the 2020 spring budget adjustments, so that if council does choose to move forward with a taxation on vacant lands policy, it can be instituted in the 2020 corporate plan.
Okay. Thank you. I think I'll support the motion. I think it is bringing back a policy for council to look at. It doesn't make any assumptions or adjustments to our current corporate plan. So I will support that. Thank you. Go ahead and summarize. Oh, Councilor Loy?
Yes, Your Worship, and I apologize for delaying here. I'm just wondering, are there any legal implications of us doing things in this manner? I mean, can it be described as punitive? A person has their property within certain things, I mean, weeds, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we have to look at it. I'm just thinking, does council or any council have the authority to dictate rates of taxation just because a landowner decides to leave it vacant at their time? We probably can because of other administrations. I just like for clarity, Your Worship, from administration, if we're on solid ground.
Yes. So the municipality does have the option to place different tax rates for different classifications. If council is aware, every year we do a adjustment for the lands that we've annexed from Parkland County back in 2000s, 1990s. As long as they remain farmland, we would tax them at the Parkland County rates and not the town of Stony Plain rates. So we do have that ability to do that. In terms of punitive versus proactive, that's the discussion during debate of the actual policy coming forward.
Yes, sorry, Your Worship. I do bring that up because that is the one aspect I'm looking at. I know there are buildings that, let's say a landowner decides to leave vacant and they become derelict or something like that. We just saw that in the Edmonton paper recently. But I'm just saying that if I decided or any citizen decided to buy a lot of land and for whatever their reason not to develop on it for 8, 9, 10, 15 years, do we have the authority to tax it in that fashion? And that's what I'm asking, just for clarity. Thank you.
Okay. Does the administration want to provide clarity on that?
Your Worship, just for general clarity, yes, the authority does exist. That would be part of the review that we could bring back. And as for punitive, the only comment I would offer at this time is, I mean, there is that authority exists. I mean, legally it's there. Punitive is a whole different discussion. And ultimately that's, I mean, a ratepayer, a citizen, a landowner would have different ways to address that with council, both through the democratic process, so to speak, and through an illegal process if necessary.
Okay. Councilor Matthews.
Your Worship, through to administration, can you just provide your context as to how you see the value of this policy in our community based on your experience with it?
Your Worship, I think I can offer some general comment at this point in time, but I think that would be what would be contained in the report when it would be tabled. But the whole concept or the whole theory behind a taxation style like this, or a subclass, so to speak, of this matter, is to disincentivize the idea of sitting on land for a lengthy period of time. That's really that's the theory in a way. So the idea would be to, cause we put a rate in place that would call it disincentivize or motivate the landowner to move to a further, scaled up development at some point in a reasonable future. That would be the general theory behind it. Do they work? Can they work? There's different forms of this type of thing across, I was familiar with one in Saskatchewan. You could do this in Saskatchewan. We would, and it was used, it's one piece of a puzzle when it comes to, promoting development, I guess. I don't know if it would be the be all end all, but it's a piece to all of it, so.
Okay. Any other questions, comments before I let Councillor Laurie close? Councillor Meyer, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to administration. Is this an issue that administration feels is an issue in our town?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Meyer, to the rest of Council, I don't know if it would be considered an issue because the general motivation would be to, again, provide one more piece to a puzzle of potential growth, I guess, is the way you would look at it. And again, frankly, Your Worship, I haven't put a whole ton of research or a whole lot of thought into these particular processes at this point in time, and I think that would be part of what we would do over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks to 12 weeks or whatever, as we kind of get into it a little bit further and put more effort and thought to it. So I leave it at that. I don't want to speculate too much at this point in time, Your Worship.
That's your question. Okay. Excuse me. Does administration have the capacity to do this before spring adjustment? I don't know how onerous the work is to do and research and bring back a policy with all those conditions.
Your Worship, that these policies exist, that is doable.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Laurie.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and I really appreciate the comments from Council and Administration in respect to this. As we've heard, this is just one additional piece into the puzzle or one additional tool in the toolkit that we can use to continue a growth focus within our community. In relation to Councillor Loy's comments about the punitive side of things, I certainly think because this piece of this bylaw or this policy exists in many communities out there, I certainly think that there would be plenty of data at this point in time in which we could access and see whether there would be any legal risks from a punitive side of things. So as I said, I appreciate the comments. I think as we move forward, we need to be very focused on the different tools and the different facets that we can use to continue to move our community forward and continue to focus on growth and development within our community. At that, Your Worship, I will close and I will ask Council for their support on this motion.
Thank you. So with that, members of Council, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, and that is carried. Okay, members of Council, any other motions, comments, and stuff to move forward so that we can see what the proposed tax rate is? Okay, seeing none. Can administration pull up the spreadsheet of what a proposed tax rate is right now? So currently, if we're happy with this and we end the corporate plan meetings, we're looking at a 5.03% tax increase. Okay, 5.03 might be okay in times when we have a lot of economic growth and we have a lot of jobs out there. Currently, I don't see that in our economy. I don't see that in Alberta. With the fact of moving out the storm and then adding the storm rate utility, and also having increases to water, wastewater, that does add to the burden on our taxpayers. I would like to see that number come down, so I have a couple motions That might help if members of council are willing to support it. Deputy Mayor, you have the chair.
Go ahead.
Okay. Members of council, I'll ask you to turn to page 41, please. And I'm looking at the legacy fund repayment for land purchase of $770,871. That money was an internal borrow for parcels of land in the downtown area, which the town's Stony Plain acquired for future expansion and future growth as we develop and revisit the town square idea. I fully remember when we initiated the legacy fund and what it was used for. And it has grown to a point that we can internally borrow. And I fully expect us to pay it back. But when times are tough and we control the payment schedule, I think it's prudent for us to decrease the payments by half. So the motion would be to reduce the legacy fund repayment for land purchase by 50%, or $38,935.50 for a tax savings of 0.229 decrease.
Can we see the motion?
Yeah, we'll get that on there first and then. Yeah, we'll get we'll make that a little bit bigger, and then also we'll get the motion on the screen before we continue. Yeah. Okay.
Everybody's clear with what he's
Okay.
proposing?
And then I'm going to just add to review in 3 years.
Would you like to speak to that motion?
Yes. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the motion is to reduce the current repayment back to ourselves. Administration had proposed a repayment of over a 10-year period. I'm asking us to, because of the times that we're facing, is to reduce that by half to repay ourselves back over a 20-year period. However, I'm asking for review in 3 years because if the economy turns around and there is more growth, more funds that come, or even if there's a surplus, we as a council can direct administration to put that towards this repayment. So instead of adding more tax burden to our residents at this point in time, when the economy is down, and we're also looking at increases in water, wastewater, garbage, and etc., those little increases add up and they accumulatively will hurt our residents. So with the 50% reduction, we'll alleviate some of that tax pressure this year and following years coming.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Bennett?
No, I needed a clarification that this was going to happen every year. I think the mayor just clarified that we will repay it in 20 years instead of 10.
Yes,
So
with
that
a review in 3.
Yeah, so that, I don't think that it says that in that motion. It says that we're going to reduce the legacy repayment by 50%. And at first, I thought that meant just this year, but you're saying that it's for 20 years. So to repay it in 20 years.
Okay, I'm willing to make that, take that as a friendly to adjust it so it's more clear.
Thank you. That makes it more clear for me.
Okay, so it'll be to be reviewed then.
Yeah.
Any further discussion on that? Councillor Laurie?
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Just a question to administration. I see here in our legacy reserve a balance in 2019 of $85,000. 2020 additions were slated at $148,871. So it looks like we're reducing this down to approximately $110,000. And in 2020, we only have $7,500 committed. So it seems like we're still putting a pretty significant amount of money into this reserve. And I'm just wondering if administration can advise. I see nothing else necessarily coming out of the reserve up to the point of 2022. Are there any projects currently on the books, any capital projects, operations that we anticipate using the legacy reserve for in the short-term future?
Your Deputy Mayor, through to the rest of council. Just for a quick refresher, the Legacy Reserve was established quite some time ago, I believe around 2007, 2008, if I recall. There's an annual amount that's put into, which I believe is $50,000. And the number you're quoting would reflect both the proposed repayment and the $50,000. The amounts you see coming out of there are, I don't remember the exact wording, but essentially it's the interest that is spent out of the reserve to fund some of our local community groups. That's the basics of the reserve. The money we took out of it for the land purchase was the first time that it has been accessed for anything other than that. And I believe the council of the day saw fit to create that reserve, put I think it's the $50,000 annually. I think it was kicked off with about 300 at the time. And the intent was to simply just allow that $50,000 to be put in. The interest would grow in the event that a future council would see need to utilize it, but it's restricted, and it's only been accessed once in probably about the 10 years or more that it's been in existence now. The idea was to grow what would be considered sort of a heritage fund, I think, is the thinking.
Excellent, thank you. And if I may continue?
Yes,
Thank you. With that, I'll definitely be inclined to support this motion. I think it's very financially responsible for us that we access this reserve for something we felt was for the good of the town on a long-term basis. There was a significant amount of money in this reserve that, as we've just heard from the CAO, was meant for specific projects, meant for the town to determine these projects, and that this fund still will continue to contribute the interest rates to some of our community groups and so on and so forth. So, as much as I'd absolutely love to see the money be repaid as quickly as possible, I think it's very important we recognize the ask on our residents and the ask on our ratepayers, and I think this is a responsible way to do that. So appreciate the motion, Your Worship, and thank you very much, Deputy Mayor, for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie. Councillor Matties.
Deputy Mayor, just a question for administration regarding our reserves overall. Are they growing over the last few years? And what is the, I guess basically the correct policy in terms of how we should manage our reserves over time in terms of adding or returning funds to them that have been taken out?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Matties, there is annual contributions made to the reserves. The water and sewer reserves have been increasing with the increasing rates on those. The tax-based funded reserves have been fairly status quo over the past few years. Your second question was about the internal borrowing. So we do have a policy on internal borrowing within the reserve policy, which suggests a 5-year repayment, but it does leave it open to the discretion of council. And so council is fully within their rights to make this motion to repay over a longer term.
So just to clarify what you said with regards to our reserves and overall, we've maintained the level of reserves that you feel are adequate for our community, and that this is a good course of action to take.
To clarify the first part, there's probably further analysis that we can do and will be reviewing with fiscal sustainability over the upcoming year as to provide council some more information as to what is optimal level of reserves. There's not a perfect answer to that. And so I think it's further discussion needed on that one as to is that something that we should set by policy? And that's a much larger discussion than probably tonight, but that's something that probably is done best at a policy level.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Matties. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. If I understood you right, you said that we have been using the interest to fund some of our community groups, and we will still be able to do that, but of course it'll be less amount because we have less in there to give. Do you know what the discrepancy will be?
Your worship, through to Councillor Bennett, the internal borrowing policy does require us to hold the interest whole. So we do look at the legacy fund and calculate the interest that it would have earned if we would not have borrowed from it. So it doesn't have any impact on those grants that we fund. I think it's 75% of the interest goes to fund those grants. So it's kept whole with the internal borrowing.
My second question, Deputy Mayor. What will be the cost to, in comparison for the interest rate that we'll be paying to stretch it out for 20 years compared to 10 years? In other words, are we going to be paying back way more than, because when we borrow from this, we have to pay it back with interest. So I'm concerned about the amount of interest we'll be paying for 20 years compared to 10 years.
Your worship, through to Councillor Bennett, I would need some time to maybe calculate that. I think currently the interest is about 19,000, and I think the balance of the borrowing was around 800,000. But we could do that calculation for you. We just need a few minutes.
I think, if I can step in there, I think Councillor Bennett is asking for, if we borrow that from outside ourselves, there's an interest rate for borrowing the money. Are we charging ourselves interest for borrowing our own money?
No, I know we are doing that. I know we are doing that. Sorry, I don't mean to be argumentative. What I'm wondering is the cost to repay it in 10 years compared to the cost to repay it in 20 years. That's my question. Are we going to be repaying this amount of money that we have borrowed so that the interest is way more than what it would be if we paid it off in 10 years?
I think what Councillor Bennett is really asking for, if we, and I'll use simple numbers, if this loan is $100,000 and in 10 years we pay $1,000, what does that look like if we pay that over 20 years? That's the difference that she's looking for, is that number. And how does that equate to what the term is up top? Correct?
Thank you, yeah.
It is significant. I feel like Jeopardy, right?
While they're looking for that, is there anybody else, council, that would like to ask any questions? Or we can just wait while they figure that out. Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Further to Councillor Bennett's comments, I appreciate that, and I am really interested to see that rate. I think if there's anything, though, that does leave me with a little bit of ease on it is that this isn't interest being paid to a bank for debenture. This is interest that's going back into our own account, which is being used to fund community groups. So even though I have a little concern about what the additional cost of the borrow would be for doing that, I think where that money goes, even if it is costing us a little bit more, where that money goes makes that a little more palatable, as well as the fact that we're looking at a review in 3 years, whereas if we see fit at that point in time, maybe we've seen a little bit of growth numbers, maybe our economic situation is a little bit better, where we can revert this back to maybe even a smaller debenture than we had originally proposed, or anything like that. So very, very good question. I'm very interested to see the answer, and I think administration appreciates it when we make them work. But you know, if there's any saving grace, in my opinion, it's that at least when we are repaying this money, it's going towards something of value for the town rather than just into the pockets of a bank.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie. Councillor Matties?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. One comment that I would make is that to keep in mind that the original repayment schedule was 5 years, and because of the tax situation and the economic situation, it was brought or extended to 10 years already. And so we're already stretching in terms of that. And at the end of the day, I have concerns that it will stay this way. You know, it'll just continue to go over a 20-year period. And I think there's at some point we have to start following the rules of paying money back and putting money back where it belongs, because we have accountability to this community to be in good, strong financial position. It means that we need to have some reserves
Thank you, Councillor.
that do the job they're supposed to do.
Thank you. Is administration ready?
Your worship, no, it's not an easy calculation. We're trying our best to at least get an estimate for you.
Is there anybody else on council that would like to speak at this time? What's that? Could you please start with it, Bruce?
Jen, what's the interest
Okay.
rate over 10 years? Do you know what that number is?
Your worship, through to Councillor Matties, it is, you know, it's around the 3%, and I think the balance borrowed was around 800,000, so it is around 20,000 a year. The problem is it's declining each year, and so that's what we're trying to do a quick calc on. That interest comes down every year as the balance declines.
Okay, so if we use general numbers, if at 20,000 over 10 years is $240,000, you spread that out by another, so just say $200,000, so that we're paying ourselves. So it's either paying us or we tax the taxpayers.
I'll make a bit of a comment. I think that at this time, to be fiscally responsible to our community, we look for all ways to do it. This money is money that is borrowed internally from a fund that has been within our community for a long time. It has a purpose for it. We as council seen fit back when we did the borrowing within council to see the future growth of our community. And the unfortunate thing at this time in our economy, which is a reflection of all of our province, things are very down. So I think today we look very close at everything that we can cut, knowing that in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years even, if the economy does rebound to some aspect, that this will still be there for us to be able to increase at that point in time, which I truly believe, sitting on council for the past 3 years now, this council looks at everything and does things very prudently. So I think it's something that when it was brought forward, $40,000 didn't seem like a lot to me, but it does bring the tax rate down enough to bring it below a 5%, which I think is quite important at this point in time as well. When we do the calculations based on what we've seen, it's about $300 a year for the average household, spread out over a monthly term. I think if we can bring that down even a little bit, it helps. Every little bit helps for the community at this point in time. So just as a general comment, I think it's very prudent for all of us sitting here today to look at every aspect of what this budget has in front of us. Yes, Councillor Loy.
Yes, Your Worship. We're still waiting for that answer, and I'm not so sure that we're going to totally need it. The mayor did put in, and I quote, to review in 3 years. There's the safety valve that's inserted into it. There will be a new council in 3 years, but it's there. I don't think we have to belabor this anymore, and with all due respect to you, Councillor Bennett, but this is not just a freeze for 20 years. We'll review it, and it can be reviewed at any time prior to that. It can be brought forth. That's my comments. I'm ready to vote personally.
Did you wish to say something, Councillor Bennett?
Well, basically, I just wanted us to think about that. The fact that we, when you're repaying in interest, it's not free money. It's going to increase the amount that we have to pay back. As long as everybody's thought about that.
I'll ask Councillor Choi Mayor Choi to close, please. I've been called worship tonight. He can be councillor, so.
That's right. Thank you for the good suggestion, Councillor Matthews. I appreciate that. Members of council, I ask you support on the motion. I think I echo some of the comments around our table, and I do share the same concerns as well. We are in tight financial times, and if we can help alleviate some of the tax burden on our ratepayers today, why don't we do that? So I think every little bit helps. It all adds up, because throughout this corporate plan, there are small increases in utility rates and other rates and user fees that are going to be added to that are above and beyond the tax rate itself. I understand the fact about interest paying ourselves, but the saving grace is that we're paying interest to ourselves. So it only actually helps our reserves because we're actually adding more to it, because we're adding more interest to it, because we owe ourselves money. So again, a positive versus a negative there. I've also put into the motion to review in 3 years. So in 3 years, if the economy is good and we want to pay it off in 2 or that fiscal year, that's all up to that council at that time. So it's not directly for a full 20 years, but just making the payments equated to 20 years so that we can actually have an idea what the payments were. So I expect to council in 3 years to review this, and then they might want to continue those payments, or they might want to accelerate them. But it is right now in times of belt tightening. We have to look at ways to reduce the tax burden on our ratepayers, and this is one way that we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Choi. I'll call the question at this time. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Do you have anything further at this time, Mayor Choi?
Thank you. I'll take the chair. Members of council, any other questions, motions to change or adjust the budget? Seeing none, can I have the spreadsheet of where the taxes is right now, please? So we're sitting at 4.8, and again, that's better than the 5.03, but still, I'm not very comfortable with the 4.8 in the current times. I don't see any more hands up, so Deputy Mayor, you have the chair. Okay. Again, referring to page 41 of our corporate plan budget. Okay, I'm looking at the Stony Plain Central land of $209,000, which is equivalent to a 1.23% tax increase.
Your Worship, or Deputy Mayor, I think we would request the motion be restated.
Yep, I haven't made a motion yet.
He hasn't made it yet.
I've just transferred them to the chair, and I asked council to get to that page so we can actually talk about it.
You could go ahead.
Okay, so Deputy Mayor, the motion is to reduce the Stony Plain Central land repayment by $90,000 in 2020. Which equates to a 0.52% reduction. Okay. And then to add $10,000 to that payment each of the next subsequent 9 years. Which equates to a 0.05% increase of taxes the following 9 years. And as soon as administration has that done and on screen, I'd like to speak to that.
We'll give everybody a minute to read that. Comfortable with the motion? Go ahead.
Okay. Members of council, again, I direct you to our current realities in our financial climate, and what's happening in Alberta, what's happening in Stony Plain. We are in fiscal restraints, and we need to find places where we can reduce tax burdens on our residents and ratepayers. Again, this is a internal borrow that we borrow to purchase lands and for the school site. The initial motion that was passed by council was to purchase the land and then to pay back ourselves for that purchase so that we have the funds for it in 10 years. I'm not asking to change the length of the payment. We're still keeping it at 10 years. I'm asking because for the reduction this year, which equates to a 0.52% tax decrease, but then add those $90,000 that we have subtracted, $10,000 over the next 9 years to equate to the same amount that we would have paid. So the amount still gets paid off in 10 years, but we're lessening the burden this year. And then from experience, each year that moves on, that $10,000 becomes less of a percentage increase. So next year, using today's numbers, is a 0.05% increase. But after full assessment, it might be only a 0.05. And the year after that might be a 0.045, and so on and so on. So the financial impact to our ratepayers is a lot less this year, and then every subsequent year, the increase will cover the $90,000 difference that I'm asking for this year.
Thank you. Can you show us the tax rate implication? Thank you. Would anybody at council like to speak? Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. First question, just to administration. His Worship mentioned the internal borrowing on this. Can you walk us through this internal borrowing, how this was done, where it was funded from, where it's being paid back to, any interest costs that are attributed to that, and so on?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie, this was funded by the off-site levies, which are housed in deferred revenue. So a little bit different than the reserves, but sort of same concept, that those do need to be made whole again. And sorry, what was the other question?
Any
Or does that
information on the
answer?
payback, so any interest, et cetera, et cetera.
The interest needs to be made whole on these accounts as well, but because it's being repaid over 10 years, so same length of period, lesser, it's no impact other than the slight variation between that $10,000.
And a follow-up question as well. In respect to potential surpluses or deficits that the town sees at the conclusion of a fiscal year, would there be any opportunity to repay some of this borrowing if the town realizes a surplus?
Through the chair to now I'm getting confused to Councillor Laurie. Yes, that is an option. So currently, the policy speaks that 1/3 of the surplus does have to go to tax stabilization reserve, but the other surplus could be directed per council's purview, so it could go to either of these upon direction of the surplus number.
And as a follow-up to that, do we have a current projection for 2019 as to if we will end up in a surplus or deficit position?
Through to Councillor Laurie, not really at this time. It's not, I would say, not projected to be substantial.
Would we have an idea on this position by spring adjustments?
Yes. Yes, we would.
Thank you. Your Worship, if I may offer a friendly amendment. What I would look to add to this would be that the $90,000 be paid through surplus at the end of 2019 if there is available surplus, which would then require the additional $10,000 not to be added on in each additional year. So the amount of the borrow would still need to be added back into the taxation in 2021, in the 2021 corporate plan. But that amount of the borrow then would not increase, even though the increase you're looking for is marginal. I think if we do have the opportunity to make that payment for this year whole by having those revenues come from surplus, I would much rather see that rather than continuing to extend that out.
Will you accept that as a friendly?
I do, thank you.
Anybody else at council wish to speak?
Yeah.
No, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if we could maybe just get some clarity on the wording so we have the right wording there.
So my intention would be that should the town realize a surplus available of more than the $90,000, that be allocated to the repayment in replacement of adding $10,000 per year for the next 9 years.
Thank you.
Council clear with that amendment? Friendly amendment? Anybody wish to speak to that?
It's a friendly, so you don't have to talk as the amendment. It's the full.
Anybody wish to speak to the full motion? Councillor Myers?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Is there, do we not already have a policy in place regarding what we do with surplus at the end of the year? Sorry, through you to administration.
Your worship, through to Councillor Meyer, that's correct. So the 1/3 under policy does go to tax levy stabilization, and the remainder is under council's discretion. So typically we would bring a recommendation as to where we would recommend putting it. In this case, if there was more than 90,000 remaining after that 1/3, it would, with this motion, go to repay these offsite levies.
Is that your answer?
Yep.
Councillor Matties?
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie, if you could clarify, so if there is under, let's say it's 89,000, would it pay off the portion and then the remainder year, if there was additional surplus, pay it, as opposed to go to the stream that the mayor is suggesting? So I too would like to see it repaid through surplus.
And yeah, again, whether there needs to be a verbiage change to the amendment or not, I would tend to agree with that, Councillor Matties, that will be paid through surplus until the repayment was realized. But I do feel that if we end up in a deficit position at the end of 2019, that then it should be added as $10,000 a year for the 9 years.
Okay,
So if
it doesn't say that, then it should.
So administration, is there a better wording that we can use to clarify that that will get paid through surplus, even if it is over a bit longer period of time?
as long as surplus is realized.
As long as there's a surplus realized.
Your worship, Deputy Mayor, if I may, just a bit of a procedural thing here. So the first part of the motion, is clear about, its amendment to the corporate plan, so to speak, to do what's in the first couple lines. The second part of the motion, whether the wording as it is now, even if it was to be clarified, so to speak, frankly, I think is more of an intent motion in that, unless the numbers are exactly as they are written up there, we're going to be back in the chambers regardless saying, here's the surplus, here's what happened, here's the motion that was passed to remind you, so to speak. And there may be a little bit more, there may be a little bit less, so on and so forth, seeking clarification and direction. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if I may here, it would appear the amendment or the council that made the amendment is wanting to ensure, if nothing else, this conversation happens and that this is on the books as the starting point of the conversation when surplus is discussed, if I may paraphrase, so to speak. And if that's the intent, and if council is clear on the intent, then what would happen when we get to that point in time is the report would come in from corporate services saying, here's the surplus, blah, 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 and here's what you told us to do then. We've started that, and there's a little bit more money or there's a little bit less. What would you like us to do with the rest of it, kind of thing?
Are you suggesting then that that bottom part does not need to be in here? It is not part of what the motion should be?
I would suggest that the intent is clear, that the discussion is had, and we would be reminding that and having this wording in there. And I think between the majority of us here, we would all be on generally the same page to have the conversation about utilizing surplus to pay this first, then other things, is the intent as I understand it.
Councillor Loy?
This motion that we have in front of us, because there is some ambiguity to it, but as long as administration is, this motion will work.
I believe so. You're
Okay, I don't want to, Deputy Mayor, to see any stumbling blocks as we're trying to unravel it down the road.
Anybody else from council wish to speak to that? If we can have close from Mayor Choi.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Again, I ask for council's support. This is, again, an internal borrowing from within the town of Stony Plain. We're paying ourselves interest. I don't like to carry as much interest and paying and stretching it out, so that's why we're not stretching this one out. We're just paying it through a different means and a different kind of contractual obligation. And I would actually refer to this as kind of like a hockey analysis. If you look at front-ending or back-ending a hockey contract, we're averaging the same amount over 10 years, but instead of, for example, front-loading a contract, what some players do, and then having at the tail end of the contract lower, I'm asking that we have a lower front end and then higher in the end, where in 10 years where the economy is better, because the increases will be smaller than it is hit today. So members of council, again, I ask for your support.
Thank you, Your Worship. With that, I will call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? So carried. And I will turn the chair back over to yourself.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Well done. Any more motions to reduce, change, or adjust our budget? Administration, can you pull up the spreadsheet to see where we are currently sitting at a tax rate with our current changes to what we have? Okay. Any more motions to change? Councillor Loy.
No, Your Worship. I just want to speak very briefly to the screen. Again, this is something that if we are finished, 4.27 is a very livable thing. We do have spring adjustments. I want to remind us all of that. In my years on council, I've never seen a budget or spring adjustment that upped the amount, and I've never seen it at the amount. It's always been reduced later on down the road, because that's when we have the true picture of our accounting.
See no more hands up to make motions. Is that a motion? No. Okay. Actually, I'm done. I do have some more motions to adjust it, but I believe that we'd be doing a disservice to our community if we continue to lower the tax rate. Being above 5% was not acceptable to me and to lots of residents. What we've done as a council to adjust, maneuver, and kind of fine-tune what we've seen to bring it down to 4.27, which still allows us to continue to grow our community, provide services for our community, but also lessens the burden that was originally put onto our community. We know this next few years is going to be tough. 4.2% is still up there, but is within the ballpark of a lot of the other municipalities around us of the capital region. Just that. Okay, so before I end the corporate planning session, I'm just going to go around the table to just ask council for comments and maybe some questions as we kind of close up the evening of how you felt about the process and maybe some thoughts going forward. Deputy Mayor, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I thought tonight was, well, actually the last 3 nights have been a very trying time for all of us sitting here at this table. And the weeks leading up to sitting at this table, there is a lot of decisions to be made with very few dollars, trying to keep the tax implication reasonable to our residents and still giving them the services that they require for our community to move forward. I think that we all know that moving forward, we're still in some trying times. However, I think this gets us into a pretty good position within our community to move some economic development forward and to bring new things to our community, which will help with taxes down the road as well. I do think that administration has done a very, very good job at bringing what they have brought to us today, keeping in mind all of the wants and needs of the community and the wants and needs of council, and the trying times that this new council keeps continuing to bring to them to keep this town moving forward. So I want to thank each and every one of them for their abilities to be patient with each and every one of us, and I look forward to spring adjustments. I'm hoping that, as always, from what I've seen since I've been on council, that administration takes the time to look closer at what we have today to bring our tax levy down some more yet, so that our residents are in a bit better position as well. And I know and having confidence in what this administration can do, I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I walked into this corporate planning session with 4 goals in mind. Number 1, to see the progression of our recreation center. Number 2, to take the first step towards transit. And number 3, to increase the library budget and continue to support it. And number 4, to support our local groups. I think that they provide a service, and in tough times, organizations like Victim Services, Turning Points, even Allied Arts, they provide a quality of life for our residents. So I was very happy to see that all of those have been secured. Mr. Mayor, I kind of giggled there when Councillor Loy was saying we've never seen, and in my mind I went, don't jinx us. Don't jinx us, because I don't think we've seen the end of this. We do not know the full impact of what the photo radar changes that the provincial government have initiated. We don't know the full impact of our partners and the cost-sharing agreements. We don't know the full impact of the taxes in lieu of grants. There are many, many areas that, with our provincial budget just coming in on October 24th and us doing this 3 weeks later, there are many, many impacts. I think this council's done a good job, and I'm proud of this. But I just think that there are other factors that may play into our spring adjustment.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. And I just don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but there was 1 year that we did see a tax increase during spring adjustment. So just to be clear, it does happen the other way as well.
It was before my time, I hope.
I know it wasn't, sir. It was during your time. Councillor Matthews.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I just really appreciated the conversations that we've had over the last 3 evenings. Whether or not a motion was accepted or approved or not, Those conversations were very important and just increased all of our awareness of the issues that we're dealing with and the importance that we place on the decisions that are being made. I too came here with, a vision of starting a transit system, and I'm very excited that we are going to get started in our community on that. I also understood the economic reality and knew we needed to cut back in areas and improve efficiencies and set priorities. I came here with a view of regional and looking at ways that we can work with our regional partners on initiatives moving forward, both within our community and within our neighboring communities. I think there's so many wonderful things that we are doing in this community, and I'm really, really excited to be part of this whole process as we continue to move forward from what past councils have decided. So anyways, I look forward to strat planning. I look forward to further discussions in the new year, and thank everybody for the process tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. Councillor Laurie, please.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Just a couple of things. First, a question for administration. As we move forward, we continue to have our residents ask us, well, how do our taxes look in comparison to other communities and so on and so forth. I didn't feel that this warranted a motion, but I just ask administration if it would be possible for them, when the corporate plan comes back on the 25th, if they could include a chart of the 13 member communities of the EMRB, which shows the current residential and non-residential tax rates and where the town of Stony Plain sits in that, as well as where our 4.27% increase would put us in that. And then hopefully that would also allow you to come back in spring adjustments with all of the numbers for 2020 to show where the town of Stony Plain sits in comparison to the 13 members of the EMRB to which we are so closely tied.
Okay. Thank you for that comment, Councillor Laurie. I think that's very easily done because they're on the municipal government website. If you just click on municipal snapshot or whatever it is, I forget what it is, but if you can click on that, you can click on the city and it'll tell you, you can get the assessment value, you can get tax rates, you can get linear assessment, you can get all that on there. So I think it's easy enough for administration to bring back together. Administration, is that easy enough, or do you want that in motion?
No, Your Worship, we can do that for the 25th and beyond.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Second, just a general comment in respect to a item in the corporate plan from 2019 that was under the Office of the CAO and a review and identification of cost savings. While I appreciate that administration has done a very good job of continuing to review our service levels and the relevance of various initiatives, I hope that this is something that continues through the 2020 corporate plan and in future years. This initiative was to review and identify cost savings, and when I look at the budget that we received this year, it showed a 1.58% operating budget net reduction. But as we went through discussions, we did realize that 1.4% of that was truly the reduction of the storm utility amount that was formerly in the tax rate. So that left us at a net change of 0.18% reduction from the operating budget. So I'm hopeful that as we've heard about spring adjustments and so on and so forth, that it can, a combination of both hopefully some growth and the continued focus on this initiative by administration will help us to continue to realize the efficiencies throughout our organization to identify anything that is redundant, inefficient, or no longer relevant, as well as examining our various revenue streams. I just want to remind Council as well that even though we've concluded our debate at this point in time on the corporate plan, we still have a very important initiative coming forward on the 25th in regards to the storm utility. There is a lot of information out there about it, and I do encourage Council to research and share information that they do find about it so that we can all come best prepared on the 25th of November to discuss and debate that potential proposed utility. I wanted to recognize something that I consider huge, and it's a commendation to Council and to administration. When we went into this budget, we were looking at the 5.24. We see where we're sitting at 4.27. But that 4.27 includes 3.65% that was related to the RCMP building debenture and the RCMP building maintenance. Essentially things that quite literally almost could not be touched. There was almost nothing that we could do about it. So the difference between those two initiatives and the tax rate that we've settled on at this point in time is 0.62%. 0.62%. We've added funding to the library. We've added transit service into our community for the first time, something that's long overdue and is going to be a huge benefit to our community. And we're starting to pay for school lands for a school that's going to increase 150% in capacity in a new location that is better served and is going to add to growth to our community. So administration, thank you very much for the hard work in preparing this corporate plan and bringing it forward. Council, thank you very much for your debate, your discussion, your professionalism, and the fact that we can sit here and work together to come up with this type of a plan to move forward for our community, I think is highly commendable to everybody. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity to be at this table with you, and I really appreciate the hard work that we've put in, and I look forward to continuing that in years to come.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie. Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to thank administration for bringing forward a corporate plan. I think it positions us well for growth in the future. Gives me a lot of hope. I'd like to also thank my fellow councillors and the mayor for their hard work on the corporate plan as well. I feel quite confident bringing this to the citizens of Stony Plain.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Loy, please.
I heard the word jinx. You still want me to talk?
Don't worry.
Yeah, I
got you covered.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, at the tail end of all the councillors speaking, I just have to say ditto to just about everything that was said there. Really kudos to administration, Tom, and your entire team there. Said I can see here in the thing, and all the people that help support you is admirable. It's not easy. We knew, all of us coming in here, actually I had a dread on that we were looking at with the budget that was coming down from the provincial government and our federal provincial changes recently, that we were going to be in a very tough spot. We are definitely where the rubber meets the pavement. There is no hiding. You know, we are seen in the Safeway stores and the drug stores and everything, and we hear it, and going to be very happy to look anybody in the eye to say that this increase, although it'd be nice not to have 4.27, it was well thought out. And I don't think any of us have to hide our head when talking to anybody. We've added some things. Some things we could not change, and I think we've kept for this upcoming year this town on a good steady course, and we'll go through this a year from now, and let's just hope things are better, but they're good. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Town Manager, go ahead. I'll let you have the opportunity to speak as well today.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a few comments, I guess, and certainly appreciate the thank yous and the kudos. Again, as I mentioned right off the start of this process, there's a lot of people that are involved, both with input into the department plans and the work and the effort of getting the numbers ready and the presentations ready and stuff like that. And as Council well knows, it's a big team and a good team that contributes to all of this here at to get us to the point where we bring it and place it in front of Council and allow you guys to do your good work together. Your Worship, I've got just a quick comment. I was fortunate enough today, I had a meeting with my fellow CAOs in Fort Saskatchewan, and the outgoing city manager from Edmonton, Linda Cochran, was there, and if you've never met her, she's a absolute dynamic and interesting and fascinating city manager. She worked her way up through that Edmonton hierarchy from frankly a rather entry-level-ish spot right up to the I don't know if you call it the very top or the or what have you, but you know, as we were sitting there and we were having conversations much like council about challenges and economics and provincial policy and so on and so forth, Linda was good enough to remind us that you know, together we've gotten through worse, we'll get through this. The work we do is good work, it's honest work, it's community building work, and as long, you know, as we come together with the right intentions and the belief in a better tomorrow, that you know, we'll get there. And it was sage advice from intelligent and inspiring woman that's done this for, I think, about over 40 years, although she wouldn't tell us the exact amount of years. But that reminded me again of what we do and why we do it. And it's always a pleasure to bring this document into this room and allow the members that sit at the big table, so to speak, or the big horseshoe or whatever, to do your work on behalf of the community. So, Your Worship, I thank you for the chance to make a few comments and thank Council for all of your effort over the last 3 nights.
Thank you. So before we adjourn, I just want to take this opportunity to thank our staff, the general managers, and everybody that works for our municipality. The work that you guys do for us is invaluable. It keeps the lights on, keeps the water going, keeps the sanitary going, the grass is mowed. We appreciate what you do. I know in the budget was tight and there was not a lot we can do in terms of wages, salaries, etc. But that is the financial reality that we are in, and we appreciate you bearing the burden with us as we continue to move on. The budget that was presented for us, that was presented by SLT, you guys did a good job of where we started to get to where we are. You followed the municipal development plan that we've approved as council that guides our community. You followed our strategic plan that council approves every year after our strategic plan, so that our vision is met for our community. In these 3 nights of corporate planning, you guys answered questions left, right, and center. You're able to provide us information. So as a council, we're able to make motions, debate them, make adjustments to them, and vote on them so that we can fine-tune the corporate plan, because we are the ultimate governance members of this community. We're not the managers. We don't know what you guys do in IT or public works or the swimming pool, but we're the governors of our finances, we're the governors of policy and bylaws in our community. I'm glad that council stayed above that level. We didn't dwell into the weeds. We didn't get into the managerial stuff. We stayed on top where we should be, focusing on our future. A 4.27% increase is not ideal, but it's necessary. As mentioned by Councilor Laurie and through our corporate plan, 3.19% of it is for the bench borrow of a new RCMP building. We needed that. The current one that we rented from the federal government was falling down. It was inadequate. Okay. And another 0.46 was that for the operations, because of the larger building, you have a little more expenses. So as mentioned, to increase it by 0.62%, to continue to further move the community forward with transit, rec center, and even a new public works building. I have to give a lot of kudos to members of council. The discussion, the debate, and the conversation. We don't always agree, but what we do is we respect each other, our views and opinions. So now, no matter how upset we get sometimes, we always leave here with a smile on our face because we are passionate about a community. We talk that way. We argue that way because we just want to see the best for our community, for the future generations that will come after us, for the future councils that will come after us. We're setting the stage for our growth, for our prosperity. So I am honored and privileged to be the mayor, and I am proud to lead this team. Well done, guys. Thank you very much. And it is adjourned.